This is Gridiron Graduates, a weekly podcast covering all things football. Episode number 48, Draft Breach. Recorded September 28th, 2016.
Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another edition of the Gridiron Graduates. Hitting you back up as always, Bill Rossetti, and of course Ian Wharton on my co-pilot seat. What is going on, my brother?
Not too much, man. Just same as always, avoiding the injured reserve for another week. So obviously, not doing too bad if I'm still on the active list, even if I'm only probable for every game. But no, man, everything's good. Just we're really hitting the middle of the season now, especially for weeks 4, obviously in the NFL coming up. And then, obviously college football, we're in like that week 5, week 6 stretch where the games really start to matter. And the matchups are just gargantuan, especially in college football. This is a huge college football weekend. So that it's going to be a great weekend, of course. And weather's starting to cool off a little bit. Even down here in Houston, the temperature's been like the 70s and 80s. So it's been super nice. And so yeah, man, life's good. I can't complain.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it's getting a little chilly up this way too. So fall's definitely here. But yeah, like you said, especially in college, a lot of good games come up. We'll touch on that in a bit. But yeah, unfortunately, the injury bug struck again this week, and he must have been really hungry because he went after 2 big-name stars, including arguably the best defensive player in the league, definitely the best defensive lineman, and that is J.J. Watt. He was placed on injured reserve with a back injury. Of course, he had the back injury during preseason, but was able to come back playing week 1. But now he's on IR, and he's expected to miss most of the season and could very well miss the remainder of the season. So it's brutal blow for the Texans. They did sign Antonio Smith in the wake of the loss, but boy, to know this early that they're going to be without their star basically, that's a killer for a Texans team that just got downright embarrassed by the Patriots last week. And we talked last week. You mentioned how this was kind of a prove-it game for the Texans. They really could have used this one to show that they're or should be at least considered with the class of the AFC, even with the Patriots starting Jacoby Brissett. Well, Brissett goes out and has a pretty good game, and the Texans came up absolutely flat, get shut out on Thursday night, and now they lose Watt. So just a bad week altogether for the Houston Texans.
Yeah, I almost felt silly last week mentioning them a couple of times, especially towards the end of the show, as a game that they had to win. But I mean, now that we're at the point where they did lose, and they didn't just lose 27-0 to a third-string quarterback, it's like, oh no. Like, and locally here, being in Houston, man, the locals are already giving up on the season. Like, there are a lot of people here that are just like, what's the point of even getting to the playoffs, beating Cincinnati again, just to lose in the second round? It's not a good mindset to have, although I understand the mindset. To lose that game, it was a real backbreaker, and the team just looked pretty unprepared in general. Was certainly not a good showing for Coach O'Brien and his staff and Brock Osweiler and the offense. I mean, we talked about it last week. This should have been a winnable game, but they just did not look engaged. They almost looked like they took it for granted that they were going to win. And, they're going to have some of these growing pains because there's a lot of new pieces on offense. J.J. Watt wasn't looking great before he revealed that he was injured again. But nevertheless, I mean, I'm looking at this team and I'm saying, well, okay, the season's not over. You're 2-1. Obviously, this is an ugly loss, but the Patriots are all of a sudden 3-0 somehow. And it was at home for the New England. It was on a short week, and you're never going to outcoach Bill Belichick. So it's not one of those games where it's like, that's not really a big deal, because mentally I think that could really stick with this team, especially if they face New England in the playoffs. But that being said, I don't think it's going to curse the rest of their regular season. I think this is a team that still has a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. Osweiler has to be at least average for this team to really be any good, and he hasn't been that so far. He's had some good moments, and he's had, certainly his fair share of bad moments already too. So defensively, you mentioned Watt. First off, just as far as the team is concerned, this year, it's a huge loss. Even though he wasn't 100%, even though he wasn't even dominant, like we've seen him in the past, they're going to be going from probably an average level J.J. Watt to Antonio Smith and Christian Covington, who are two players, maybe together they can help make some sort of impact this season, but even that's not a guarantee. I mean, even if they're just replacement level players, they'll probably be happy with that. It's a lot of pressure to put on Whitney Merciless and Jadeveon Clowney, and it's going to stretch this unit even more. So I'm interested in seeing how this defense reacts. As far as Watt is concerned, I mean, we may have seen the best of J.J. Watt already. Some people say you enter your prime around like 27, 28. I think I actually disagree. I think a lot of guys hit their prime earlier than that. I would say 25, 26, because the way we see it, a lot of NFL players' careers come to an end around 31. So that puts you at like 26 to maybe 28. And he's already 28 years old, and now he's got major back issues. We'll obviously see what the severity of the injuries are. We know that it's bad, but we don't know if it's going to be worst case scenario, or we don't know if it's going to be, something he can recover from. But I know that a bad back is never good, and I don't know if it ever fully heals. Watt's a little corny off the field, but he's an amazing player, and he's an amazing athlete, and I think he's a great guy, even if he is a little cheesy. It's just a shame that this happened to him, especially because he worked hard to come back early.
Mm-hmm.
And so for this to happen to him, it's just really, really unfortunate for him and the Texans.
And of course, we should also mention he did have that little spurt early in the off season where he did contemplate retirement. Obviously nothing really grew out of that, but I guess now, with this back injury and his season being over, are we going to shine some more light on that, or is he going to, continue to work hard and try to get back for next year? That's, it's an interesting discussion for down the line, but, and on the upside for the Texans, they haven't played a division game yet, and they certainly still look like maybe the best team in this division. Jacksonville is disappointed, starting 0-3. The Colts are still beatable. The Titans are beatable. So, it might not be all bad, but we'll see what happens. Should be, like you mentioned, Osweiler, he's going to have to step up. Miller's going to have to step. The offense will probably have to do their part to kind of compensate for the loss of Watt.
Yeah, definitely.
We also saw that Des Bryant got hurt this week. We actually found out today, Wednesday night we're recording this, that he has a hairline fracture, I believe in his knee. And, hairline fracture in his right knee. We're hearing he could play this week. He could be out 3 weeks. We don't know. I believe Ian Rappaport is reporting that they're going to give him treatment, and how he responds to that treatment will determine whether or not he's going to play on Sunday. So, an unfortunate loss there if he's out. But the fact that he can play on Sunday is obviously good news. So it doesn't sound like it's going to be too big of an issue. But obviously because of the name value, people are going to make note of this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really big loss. I mean, Dak Prescott, I think, has played fairly well as a rookie. And losing a guy like Des Bryant, even though Bryant wasn't getting the same action that Tony Romo would give him, it's still going to be a huge loss anytime that you lose someone like that. So, I'm looking forward to seeing who can step up in his place. Can anybody step up in his place? Because I'm not really sure that Terrence Williams, Cole Beasley, Beasley got knocked around a little bit last week, but if he's going to be missing a month, who's going to step up and who's going to help Dak Prescott besides Ezekiel Elliott? I mean, Ezekiel Elliott has some good numbers. However, he's also been kind of hurt a little bit in terms of what the rest of the offense is doing for him. The passing game hasn't been great, especially downfield. And so losing a guy like Bryant certainly not going to help that. So, that's what I'm really looking at right now is how on earth are they going to sit there at the end of the day when they figure out exactly what's going on with Dez? How are they going to devise a scheme that's going to be productive in the passing game, especially downfield? Because it's just hard to see without another weapon next to Dez. And I think this is a team that really needs to address their wide receiver situation next year in the draft early, because Dez has been banged up a couple times, and we've seen when he gets banged up, they have a hard time. Coming back from that.
So let's go ahead and go back to week 3 a little bit and kind of recap some of the other interesting things other than, the Texans loss that we kind of touched on. I got to start with Philadelphia. I mean, just absolutely stunning to me that they were able to handle the Steelers the way they did, winning 34-3. They're off to a 3-0 start now going into their byes. And they really blew it open in the third quarter, because this was only a 13-3 game at halftime, and they scored 3 touchdowns in the third quarter. Boy, Pennsylvania is in full effect, man. But I tell you what, too, that defense, got to give that defense a lot of credit, too. They've really played well, I mean, again, it's not like they played world-class offenses the first 2 weeks, but this is a potent Steelers offense that they went up against, and they held them to 3 points. So, great job so far by Jim Schwartz. And, surprise 3-0 team so far.
Yeah, they've done a great job, and especially if you look on defense, this is one of the best defenses in the NFL. I think it's actually the number 1 scoring defense in the NFL right now. Schwartz is a very good defensive coordinator. He's not a guy I'd want for my head coach position, but he's someone that I'd be happy to give my defense. And disappointed that the Dolphins actually didn't hire him. There were rumors they were going to hire him last year, and they didn't. But he's doing really well. And we knew that Philadelphia had a lot of defensive talent last year, but they just couldn't put it all together at one time. Now Schwartz has this unit playing really well. Now they haven't played they played 2 bad teams and 1 good team with Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's kind of hit or miss on their games. But nonetheless, this has been a unit that's been very sharp, and it's been very impressive. They've taken a lot of pressure off the offense. Wentz has played well within the offense, been very Alex Smithish, which is not really a surprise because you look at Doug Peterson, and that's who he's had experience working with. Making it easier on the quarterback to extend drives and take what the defense gives you, and those aren't negatives. I think that there's a negative connotation whenever you call someone an average quarterback, and really I don't think there should be. I think that's a pretty good accomplishment in today's NFL. Last week the quarterback play across the league was awful. And Wentz certainly stood out, even though the game plan was very vanilla, and he only had a handful of passes go past 5 or 10 yards. He was still impressive, and he still did a good job. So there's certainly things there that you like. This coaching staff, it's not just Peterson, it's John DeFilippo, who is a fantastic quarterback mind, has had success with much less talented quarterbacks, and also similarly talented quarterbacks like Derek Carr. And then also Frank Reich as well. Frank Reich's had a lot of success with quarterbacks and offenses too. So, I don't think that that's an accident. I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that that's a really good job of building a good stable of coaches. And I would say that Peterson's been the most impressive new head coach this year, which is really funny because, the knock on him was that no one else interviewed him this offseason. The Eagles seemed to just kind of want him and didn't really try to seriously get anyone else. And then they hired Peterson despite him not interviewing with anyone else. And so far, he's outcoached the rest of the rookies out there. So it's been a very impressive start for him.
We talked last week about some of these winless teams that were kind of in a must-win situation. You mentioned the Dolphins going up against the Browns, the Redskins going up against the Giants. They both won. It was a nail-biter, certainly, for a couple of them, especially Miami.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you can attest to. They had to go to overtime to beat the Browns, and I believe the Browns missed a field goal at the end of regulation, did they not?
It was close to the end of regulation. It was a horribly played game, really, for both teams. Dolphins went up 24-13 in the third quarter. I thought it was over at that point. Miami was starting to catch their stride, kind of woke up a little bit on offense, but they could never really pull away. And credit the Browns. The Browns did a great job of staying in there, taking a couple hits from the Dolphins, and then, all of a sudden, they've got a chance to win the game, and really probably should have, if not for a very makeable kick. So, as far as that's concerned, these just look like two bad teams. And the Browns season, they're going to have some things to look forward to. Kessler looked okay at times. Now the Dolphins' defense is soft as ice cream. And, Hugh Jackson obviously did a very good job. Terrell Pryor had an amazing game. But the Dolphins ended up pulling it out. So, the Dolphins are still kind of treading water. They play tomorrow night, Thursday Night Football, against the Cincinnati Bengals. It's going to be a tough matchup for them. I think Jeremy Hill's going to have a big game against them. But, if the Dolphins can win that one, then they're still relevant. But, that was definitely not a pretty game for really either team.
And then Washington, big win for them, 29-27 over the Giants, kicking a field goal inside of 2 minutes. This puts them now a game behind the Giants at least. Obviously not a game back of the division because the Eagles are 3-0, but, it does avoid, they did prevent themselves from going down 3 games and essentially 4 against the Giants, starting 0-3. So definitely a confidence-boosting win for the Redskins, definitely one they needed. So, credit to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like you said, it was a critical game for them to win. So, otherwise their season may be over. If not, we could be sitting here saying, well, they're basically eliminated already. So, that's what you have to do. Kirk Cousins has not been good this year, but they came up big at the right time. So, for the Giants, it's almost like, same old Giants. Losing a game that, quite frankly, would have really spurred them to possibly locking up this division or putting at least an iron grasp around this division early on in the season. But here we are, all of a sudden, they just allowed the Redskins to come right back into it. So it's pretty disappointing from their standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Anything of note you took away from Week 3? Anything caught your eye?
I was a little bit surprised how well the Packers played. I think I would come back to Aaron Rodgers. Some people were not sure whether he was, still the same guy or not. I mean, I think he showed this week that he is still an amazingly talented guy. They blew out the Lions. The Lions ended up making it close towards the end there, but that was a blowout as of halftime. Also, the Bills and Cardinals, we talked about that. It would have been ridiculous for us to sit here a week ago, but, I mentioned it last week. This is a must-win game for the Bills. They come out and they hammer the Cardinals. Force 4 interceptions on Carson Palmer. Really, we have to start questioning Carson Palmer, I think. He may have fallen off the cliff. I don't know. He's got to turn things around immediately for them to have a chance at becoming anything more than just kind of what they are, which is an inconsistent team week to week. Then also I would look at the Jets and Chiefs game. My guy Marcus Peters with 2 interceptions. That's really exciting, but I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick throws 6 interceptions. How is he starting in the NFL? I mean, I said it last year that he wasn't anything special. Yeah, he put up big numbers. Yeah, there's times where he can go off like week 1, where he had all those big plays. I think that might have been week 2 against the Bills. And that's fine, but this is what you get with him. And the Chiefs took full advantage this time of all of his sloppy passes and his poor decisions. He doesn't always play like that, but I tell you what, there's a lot more instances where he should have close to 4 to 6 interceptions than games where he should have 4 touchdowns. That was just an embarrassing game from the Jets and the Chiefs. I'm surprised they only won by 21, but defensively they look locked in and look very good right now.
I'll make a note on the Buccaneers too. Early on, because obviously I was pretty high on them going into the season, picking them to go to the playoffs, but it's not exactly a good look so far early in the season. I mean, to give up 37 points at home to a Rams team that isn't supposed to have an explosive offense.
Yeah.
I mean, with Case Keenum at the helm, and all the talk was supposed to be the Buccaneers, are supposed to have a good defense. I mean, they've got talent, but it just never seems to fully come together for them. Obviously, the offense is there. They put up 32 points. But if you're giving up, 40 to the Cardinals, 37 to the Rams, something seems off here. And, so things are not looking good early on for the Buccaneers. And let's take a moment quick, too, to recognize that the Los Angeles Rams, with Mr. Jeff Fisher at the helm and Case Keenum at quarterback, they're in first place right now through 3 weeks. So people out there listening, just let that sink in for a second. The Rams through 3 weeks. I know it's only 3 weeks in, but it's just fun to say right now that the LA Rams are in first place.
I mean, it's crazy. Who would have thought that after the first week that this would be what this team is doing? Crazy. Crazy. Especially to see them play Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay had the chance to really show, hey, we can just go out there and take advantage of a team that is very inconsistent on both sides of the ball. It's one of those things where it's early season, and sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. And that happens with the young roster for both sides. The Rams are one of the youngest teams in the NFL, and the Buccaneers are a very young team as well. So, this was not something I was expecting at all.
Not at all. So, we'll see. I believe they have the Cardinals next week. So, that should be interesting. So let's go ahead and talk about Week 4. You had already mentioned a bit about the Dolphins. They play tomorrow night against the Bengals. We've got some early morning football this week. It's one of my favorite weeks because we got football starting at 9:30 in the morning Eastern Time, all the way through. You got the Colts and the Jaguars. For a while, it looked like this was going to be a battle of 0-3 teams, but the Colts beat the Chargers last week to get to 1-2. But again, just disappointing right now to see the Jags sitting at 0-3. Hopefully they turn it around soon, but if they don't, probably looking at cleaning house next year. I think Gus Bradley's seat is getting a bit hotter as these days go by. What else we got? Drew Brees going up against his former team. So that's always fun to watch. Saints against the Chargers. First place Atlanta Falcons taking on the Panthers. 3-0 Ravens. Another surprise 3-0 team there. They've got the Raiders, so that'll be a fun one to watch. You mentioned LA, Arizona. Chiefs take on the Steelers Sunday night. Giants, Vikings Monday night. So there's some interesting games coming up this weekend. What's your takeaway or your early thoughts on what's coming?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the quarter point in the season where teams really, if you've got a new head coach, this is where you should start seeing some of that gel. You should start seeing some of those results of all the off-season work, if you haven't already. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for with some of these teams, the Dolphins and Browns. How are they continuing to develop as far as their coaching staff and their connection to the scheme and the system? And you start seeing teams start to clean things up a little bit. As far as individual games and matchups, I think the Seahawks and Jets is going to be a key game. It's a 1 o'clock game Eastern in New York. It's always tough for the Seahawks to come East Coast and play those games. That might be an opportunity, especially if Russell Wilson hurt. Maybe Fitzpatrick will decide to not throw more than 3 or 4 interceptions. And if that's the case, this might be it'll be a very physical game, and so it may end up being quite entertaining. I'm also looking at the Raiders and the Ravens. Ravens are a surprising 3-0 team. I think that's more of a byproduct of a really bad schedule so far. Been very advantageous as far as who they've played. I don't think they've played particularly well. This is an opportunity for Oakland as well to continue to beat some AFC teams, to continue to hopefully separate themselves from other AFC wildcard contenders. And, I mean, you've got to win these head-to-head games, and the conference matchups help you win these head-to-head tiebreakers when it comes to playoff time. So it's a very big game for them as well. And that's, again, going to be on the East Coast. Oakland's coming all the way over from California. Going to be playing that 1 o'clock time slot as well. Other big game, Chiefs and Steelers. Sunday Night Football. We're going to be seeing a really good Sunday Night Football game. This is going to be Steelers, who kind of haven't really found themselves yet this season, haven't found that consistency week to week of who they are, and the Chiefs, who offensively have not really been lighting it up either without Jamal Charles. So I think that the Chiefs probably have a bit of a slight edge just because their defense is so good. The Steelers' defense is pretty mediocre, but I think this is going to be a huge game as well. Certainly a possible preview matchup for the playoffs, too.
So let's flip over to the college side. I know you definitely have some thoughts on here, too. We had some good games over the weekend. Well, not if you're a Penn State fan. They got blown out, which was kind of expected, but, it's all good. Definitely some impressive wins, though, by some teams. Wisconsin going into Michigan State and beating up on Sparty. Tennessee comes away with a nice win over Florida, 38-28. Ole Miss smacks Georgia around. What a blowout that was. And we're setting up for, like you said at the top of the show, a really great weekend in college football. A lot of top matchups. So, looking back at week 3, what were some of the things that kind of caught your eye, both from, the college game perspective, and if you had any draft nuggets you were taking on?
Yeah, not too many from this week. It was more of an entertainment type day for me. There was a couple big matchups, like you mentioned. I thought the Wisconsin-Michigan State game was pretty eye-opening. I was hoping Penn State would be able to stick a little bit closer to Michigan, but alas, they just couldn't do that much. there weren't many prospects really on display this week with key matchups. The Texas A&M Arkansas game I thought was fascinating. I had a lot of fun watching that game. Texas A&M, they've obviously got the great defensive end duo, Myles Garrett, Deshaun Hall. They've got studs across their defense. Josh Evans, their safety, is a stud. Armani Watts is always around the ball as well, another safety. They're going to be a team to watch as we get closer to the playoff time. I think they could. I don't know if they'll probably lose one or two games along the way, but they could be a challenger depending on how things unfold across the way there. That was pretty much one of the only games I watched. I watched just a couple other throughout the day, and really there's a bunch of blowouts. So it wasn't really, it had intriguing matchups, but some of the matchups failed to kind of live up to the expectation, which that happens especially early in the season. Week 6, though, man, this is a huge week, and it starts early. We start Friday night, number 7 Stanford at number 10 Washington, 9 p.m. Eastern. And this is going to be one of those games that, possibly propels a guy like Christian McCaffrey up in the Heisman race. He's probably number 2 right now to Lamar Jackson. And a huge performance on prime time could certainly boost his stock as well. Washington is looking to kind of legitimize their standing right now. Chris Peterson's done a nice job there. It's a very talented team on both sides of the ball. They have potential stars at quarterback, Jake Browning, and then also cornerback, Sidney Jones. He might try to be the third great Washington Huskies cornerback in the NFL nowadays. After this season, he may jump to the NFL. So that's going to be a huge game to watch. Then I think on Saturday, all eyes are going to be on 2 matchups. Early on, 3:30 Eastern, Wisconsin and Michigan. Huge Big Ten game. Obviously, I'm a fan of Big Ten football. It's going to be interesting to see. Michigan plays another home game. I don't know how they have so many home games early this season.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I feel like out of 13 or 12 games this year, they're going to have 10 or 11 home games. It's just unbelievable how they've continued to stay at home this whole opening sequence of games. And then, of course, the late game, possibly a first-round pick quarterback this year in Deshaun Watson for Clemson, and a first-round pick for next year for Louisville's quarterback Lamar Jackson. Number 3 Louisville, number 5 Clemson. Louisville has all the momentum in the world. You could argue that they are the most explosive team in the nation right now. Bobby Petrino's squad looks fantastic on both sides of the ball, but can they do it again? Can they go to Death Valley, play under the lights? Obviously, we saw what they did to a young Florida State team. Can they do it now to a more experienced Clemson team? Clemson not really playing that great of football so far this year, especially on offense. Deshaun Watson, I think, has dipped into a day 2 prospect just based off of the concerns that I had entering the season and based off of what he's shown, and he hasn't really grabbed the game yet by the balls and kind of taken charge. I'd like to see him come alive this week and really go off and go crazy. He's going to have to because Lamar Jackson is that good, and he is almost unstoppable at the quarterback position as a runner and also as a prolific passer as well. I think Louisville wins this game, but I think it's going to be a close game. I predict I want Watson to become a star. He's got to play well this game because if Lamar Jackson drastically outplays him, I think it's a bad thing to come for Watson's stock. Watson cannot go out there and be as inaccurate as he has been so far this season. He's just been very spotty with the football. He's got to win mentally because he's not an overwhelmingly physical prospect. So I hope he comes out, plays well. If he does, Clemson will have a chance. If he doesn't, if he has another poor game like he's had the last couple of weeks, it's going to be a long game for them because we've seen what Louisville can do to teams. Outside of that, there are some other intriguing matchups throughout the schedule. As far as ranked matchups, that's about it. I would recommend maybe checking out TCU in Oklahoma. That might be a bit of a fun game. Florida State, North Carolina, it's another fun. That's going to be a good ACC game in the mid-afternoon. If you're an SEC football fan, Tennessee and Georgia is a classic as well. I don't particularly like watching Tennessee. I don't think they're very enjoyable to watch. But Georgia, I think, is fun because they got Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel, and so they're a little bit more fun for me to watch. So this is a full docket of games. I mean, we're starting early, and we're going throughout the night, from Friday night up through that Louisville Clemson game. And then even if you're looking for some late night football, there's always Pac-12 games after dark. Arizona and UCLA will be a good one. Oregon, Washington State. That could be another really fun game. So there's always these games with really high scores and just can kind of put you at ease as the night is passing, as you don't have to worry about intense defensive matchups. You can just sit back, relax, and watch these teams put up 60, 70 points on each other.
Mm-hmm. And I remember talking before the season about that Tennessee-Georgia game and how this could be, a big battle as far as deciding the SEC East division. Well, obviously now Tennessee has the edge, and if they can win this game, that makes it even bigger for them. So, but to go back to Deshaun Watson, we're going to talk a little draft here. It's only September, but as we said before, never too early to talk about draft. Eric Edholm, good friend of the show, actually posted a mock draft a few days ago. Yes, they're starting early, but
oh, nice! I must have missed that one.
Who doesn't love a mock draft in September, right?
They're always fun. They're always fun to look back at when it comes draft time.
He even told me too. He's like, I love putting the red pen to these in 6 months. And I was saying too, I'd love to get him on for the mock draft when we have it in the off season.
Oh yeah.
I think it'd be cool to have maybe like him and Field. So those are two guys definitely on the list to get in here. I think that'd be fun. So he actually has quarterbacks going 1-2, but he has Deshaun Kaiser as the number 1 pick to the Browns, and then Deshaun Watson second to the Bears. Now, the way he set up the order was he took Frank Schwab's rankings and just did reverse order. But there were his top 2 picks. So, so there you go. I guess early on there's a bit of a difference of opinion as far as Deshaun Watson goes. I mean, it could also come down to what teams have those top picks and what kind of needs they have, and certainly Chicago's possibly going to have a needed quarterback. They could move on from Jay Cutler after the season and not feel anything at all. I think, he doesn't have any guaranteed money after this season, so you very well could see Chicago starting anew next season.
Yeah, and I don't think that'd be a bad idea for them to move on from Jay Cutler. Let the Jets go get him or somebody. I think that'd be a natural fit replacement for Fitzpatrick. But I think the Bears, the Browns, even the Jets, the 49ers, obviously, these are all teams that need to look at quarterback very closely. That's why it's imperative for Deshaun Watson. He's probably going to weigh in around 6'1", 205 pounds. That's not going to be great for him. So he's got to win on the field and show that he's a great leader, that he's a playmaker, that he is smart and ahead of the game on the field. He's going to face questions about the Chad Morris offense that Clemson runs. It's a very simplified offense, and so he has to transcend the scheme at times. He did that last year, late in the season, and there's still plenty of time for him to do that this year. But it needs to start this week, and he needs to show some signs of that now. He doesn't have to hit that full stride for the rest of the season, but this is a game he doesn't really need to win. It can be like the Alabama game, where he just did so much and played very well, even in a loss. Because teams are looking, and if he doesn't step up, it's going to be guys like Patrick Mahomes, Brad Kaya, guys who I think are more day 2 talents with limited upsides. Not necessarily Mahomes. Mahomes doesn't necessarily have a limited upside, but he's a little bit, the Texas Tech quarterback, he's a bit unpredictable as far as what he's going to be, just because the scheme protects him so much at Texas Tech. Brad Kaya, I think, is a guy the NFL is going to like a lot more than draft Twitter and those of us online. I think he's very, limited. I think he's like an Alex Smith type player. So, if I'm looking at Watson and I'm saying, well, if Watson struggles again this week, I think we're going to start seeing a big outcry and a big backlash on him. I'm rooting for the kid. I hope he does great things. And, for the sake of us as NFL fans, we need him to do well. The NFL needs good, above-average quarterback play, if not better. We want Deshaun Watson and all these other guys to be very good, just so that the league continues to be watchable, or else, you don't want guys like Case Keenum and Fitzpatrick throwing 40 times a game. The NFL is not enjoyable when you have average to subpar and guys who shouldn't even be starters throwing that often. So, let's hope that Watson steps up this week. Whether they win or not is irrelevant. We as football fans will win if he becomes a good player in the NFL, and I think that won't necessarily be decided this week, but we'll have a better idea of who he is as a prospect this week.
Let's kind of scroll through this too. I'm kind of curious. I'm going to scroll through this and we'll kind of talk about it, kind of nitpick Eric's mock a little bit because, like you said, what the hell, right?
Sure.
So the rest of his top five, he actually has the Dolphins at number 3. So we'll get your thoughts here. Myles Garrett.
Oh.
Pass rusher out of Texas A&M. He has slotted to the Dolphins.
Oh man, that to be able to land Laramie Tunsil, and then Myles Garrett would be absolutely unbelievable. Myles Garrett, I'll already be able to tell you this. So Laramie Tunsil was the highest rated offensive player I've graded in the last 5 years. Myles Garrett will be the highest rated player, period, I've graded in the last 5 years. He is a sure thing. He is the next Justin Houston, or insert elite defensive end here, Robert Quinn, if you want to. He is a fantastic player. He would already be probably a double-digit sack player right now in the NFL. He is a phenomenal player. I think he is the type of talent that you would pass over a quarterback this year for him, especially depending on how Deshaun Kaiser works out. I think there's still a lot of questions about him, even though I'm a fan of him. I think Garrett is so overwhelmingly good that you probably should take Garrett no matter your team situation. So if the Dolphins somehow landed him, it would be well worth going 3-13 or whatever it would take to get that pick.
And Eric even notes in his piece, he even says the Von Miller comparisons are not even that outlandish. So
they're not. He's not that type of athlete. He's that type of athlete in terms of he's an elite athlete, but he's bigger. He's a bigger guy than Von Miller. He's 275.
Mm-hmm.
So he's probably too big to compare him to Miller. But in terms of impact, he's probably going to be that type of impact. That's the expectation. So I do think that that's fair.
And then Mike Williams to the 49ers, Jonathan Allen to the Jags at number 5, as he thinks the Jaguars continue to beef up that D-line and that defense.
I can't see that. I understand why, but another high pick into that defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a lot of assets towards that.
He makes a note of how Jared Odrick has a big cap number in 2017, and you have injuries with Senderick Marks. The rest of his top 10 then. Jabril Peppers to the Saints, Malik McDowell to the Chargers, Jamar Adams to the Titans, Cam Robinson to the Bills, and Teez Tobor to the Titans at number 10 in the pick they would acquire from the Rams.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard with some of these young guys, like whether they're going to come out or not.
Mhm.
That would be an interesting move because when you've got all those extra assets from trades, um, you can kind of afford to take a flyer pick. So, I mean, it's not outlandish to think if the Browns or even the Eagles with their newfound first round pick when we eventually get down to them with Minnesota, you can kind of almost take like a higher upside type player
Mhm.
because it's almost like a not necessarily a free pick, but it may not have been one that you counted on having originally.
Right. Yeah. Jabril Peppers. I know people are in love with him. The up and coming hybrid player that everyone talks about. That's become the new thing in the NFL. And the Saints need all the defensive help they can get. So, if they were to grab a guy like Peppers, you know, I'd be all for it. That'd be just the kind of young energy infusion that this team would need.
Yeah, Peppers is really special, man. Like he's a great player around the line of scrimmage. Extremely explosive downhill. I don't think he's a free safety or an outside cornerback at the next level. But you can play him at nickel cornerback. You can play him at strong safety. You can play him at weak side linebacker. And he's just a great football player. And so I really enjoy watching him. I'm excited to see how he does um, against Big Ten competition because I know that he's done a lot of his damage against lower level teams. So I am interested to see that. That's my only question really left with him.
Mm-hmm. Let's kind of see what else he has. He has the Redskins going running back at 11 in Dalvin Cook. Then he's got and then back-to-back running backs. Leonard Fournette, number 12 to the Colts. But we did also see Fournette go down a bit. And of course, people are going to start talking, oh, well, Fournette should have sat out. Well,
And that's not an option. I'll just say that. I mean, that's not ever going to happen. It shouldn't happen. It's going to make more questions than
exactly.
Yeah, like you can't sit there and say that someone should sit out. Like that's not ever a positive. Like yeah, obviously we don't want guys to get hurt, but it's just not going to happen.
That's just being selfish to me.
I agree, man. I agree. I think it is a selfish thing to say. I mean, you're playing this game for the team. I understand, but like scouts are going to walk away from you sitting out a season saying, "I don't want this guy on my team." First off, he hasn't played football in a year. Second of all, what does it say about his competitiveness? Is he going to sit out his contract year because he wants a new deal? Like, those are the type of things that you're going to look at. Is he going to play through injury because he might be worried of furthering his injury?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the NFL is a nasty beast, and I get that. These guys get paid a lot of money to do what they do, but they've earned it, and what they're doing at the college level is important. Now, whether they should be worked as hard as they are against bad teams, maybe not. And you'd like to see LSU maybe take it easy on him if they're not playing a ranked opponent or someone that they should probably be able to beat. But that, I mean, look, that just is what it is. It's not free labor. I know people like to say that. It's not free labor. There's a lot more that goes into it. I'm not saying they shouldn't be paid in some form or fashion. I do think that they should be able to accept payment for like signatures and stuff like that.
Right.
Whatever their value is. But I hate the idea that these guys can sit out because they wouldn't be able to, and rightfully so. They should be criticized for that.
Yeah, because then it'd be like kind of an I mentality, and like you said, scouts are gonna really look down on that, and then the whole, as you mentioned, they wouldn't have played in how long, so how much football shape are these guys really going to be in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they could work out on their own, but the fact that you haven't been on the football field in quite some time, and not because of injury, that throws up a red flag. So I'm glad he's playing. It sucks that he's hurt, absolutely, but at least he's going out there and doing what he can. Let's see what he's got. Reuben Foster to the Falcons. And then there's Christian McCaffrey he has to the Buccaneers at 14. And what's interesting is when Eric did this mock, he actually listed it as Stanford wide receiver / running back Christian McCaffrey. But he's definitely athletic enough. Maybe they can play him as like a gadget type player. So, that's up there.
Yeah, I mean, I like Christian McCaffrey. I think he can be a bell cow back in the NFL, and I think he can be a very special player. Now you're gonna have to move him. You can move him around a little bit if you want to maximize him, because he's such a good receiver too. I think he's going to be better than some of the guys that we've seen in the past flame out because they don't have a true position. I'm not sure that the Buccaneers is the best fit. Now, I can also argue the opposite and say if they're willing to play him in the slot as a receiver, then it becomes interesting because you've got those two tall receivers out there, Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans. McCaffrey can fit in between them and occasionally take some carries away from Doug Martin. Then it becomes really interesting. And you would still want to run the ball with McCaffrey 10 times a game, but if you can get him the ball 5 or 10 times a game as a receiver as well, then all of a sudden it starts to be worth it. I would be worried, though, in that situation because he's not the clear starting running back. He'd be a little bit too much like a Tavon Austin type pick. Even though he's a better football player than Tavon Austin, and I do think he's a first and second round type player, I don't know about that fit.
I'll just kind of run through the rest of his mock. He has the Lions taking Marlon Humphrey, Raiders at 16 going Raekwon McMillan. So I'm sure one of your boys. What's that?
Yeah, I love him. he's fantastic.
Cowboys, Charles Harris. Browns, and the pick from the Eagles, Tim Williams. Ravens go Dwayne Smoot. Jets take Desmond King. Giants take Royce Freeman. Chiefs go Brad Kaya. Packers, A.J. Howard. Eagles, and the pick from the Vikings, Mike McGlinchey. Broncos take Jake Butt. Texans, Lowell Otulele. Bengals, Juju Smith-Schuster. Seahawks, Pat Elflein. Cardinals, Bucky Hodges. Panthers, Carl Lawson. Steelers, Adoree Jackson. Patriots, Mac Hollins. And that's Eric's first round.
Interesting that he gave the Steelers another cornerback, and interesting that he had Carl Lawson falling so far. Artie Burns is already starting in Pittsburgh. Now, I mean, the results haven't been great, but he's already starting in Pittsburgh, so I think it'd be a little bit surprising for him to invest another first-round pick in a corner. And then I'd be surprised Carl Lawson falls that far, just because he's such a talented player, and people need edge rushers so badly. I think he's going to test really well too. But yeah, I mean, those are just kind of as you were going through there, a couple that really stood out to me. Bucky Hodges would be really good in Arizona, though, as long as they can figure out what's going on with Carson Palmer.
Yeah, absolutely. And a quick note on Adoree Jackson, he marks it as USC cornerback, punt returner, kick returner, wide receiver. So it sounds like this guy's a quite the do-it-all player.
Oh yeah.
So, and he would be he doesn't play wide receiver, I guess, mostly, but you could say he's like the second USC receiver after, of course, Juju Smith-Schuster. As I guess he feels the Bengals will continue to build up that wide receiver core after drafting Tyler Boyd, but I mean, they did lose 2 top receivers last year in free agency, so it certainly makes sense. But yeah, interesting walk, and obviously things are going to be different. It's only the end of September. Things are going to change drastically. People are going to enter the draft that we didn't expect. People are going to stay in school that we expected to be in the draft. But that's what makes this fun, and I'm sure we'll talk some more draft as the season goes on. And maybe do a little mocking. We'll see. Kind of talk about different players and see where they might fit best, and just kind of have some fun with this.
Oh yeah, hopefully, man. I'm sure we will, and that's the nice part about football is it kind of writes it for us ourselves, and we just have to evaluate it and put it all together, and then we end up, even if we end up being wrong, it always ends up being fun, and it's just it's the process that makes it great.
It is, it's fun to, we're constantly learning, but that's what's fun about it. So at that, I think we'll kind of wrap things up here. Like we said, it should be a fun weekend of football. It's also the last regular season weekend in baseball. And I know you kind of follow the Indians a little bit, so I'm sure you're pretty pleased with their season, clinching the AL Central. Still running for home field in the first round. Red Sox lost today, so Indians are right in the thick of it. But, it should be fun. I'm kind of hoping we get a three-way tiebreaker and a wild card, but starting to look like that might not happen. But it should be fun. Playoffs start next week. We'll see if the Cubs can actually finally bring home a World Series, or if it'll be another year of disappointment. Who knows? Maybe it'll be the Cubs and the Indians in the World Series.
That would be fun, man. That would be the ideal thing. I just think it'd be so perfect if right after the Cavs win a title, if the Indians can win a title, man, I'd be in heaven.
Boy,
but I won't get greedy though.
Can you talk about lifting a sports curse on a city if that happens?
Exactly.
Winning the NBA Finals and the World Series in the same season, in the same calendar year. It would make people forget all about the pain of the Browns right now, because it'd be like, hey, we have 2 world titles in 2 sports. And, you never know. The AL looks pretty tight. It seems like it's definitely up for grabs, so, who's to say the Indians can't win it? I mean, I think I heard somewhere I think they're dealing with some injuries, but...
Yeah, they do have some injuries, but hey, I mean, it's part of the game, and really all that matters is that you get hot at the right time of year.
That's right. So, you never know. Alright, bud. Thanks as always, man. Really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, man. We'll catch you next week.
Absolutely. Remember to follow Ian at NFL Film Study. And remember, he does not hate your team or your quarterback. He wants to see everyone do well.
That's right.
And I'm Bill Rossetti at Bill_Rossetti. Thanks as always for listening. We really do appreciate it. Until next time, take care, my friends. We'll see you next time right here on GG.